so many friends on the line. I can't believe we've been together this long, and it's always such a pleasure to hop on the summit and share the work, as Lala so expertly said, the work that we've done, and also look ahead at the work ahead. So we're going to dive into our strategy session here. For folks who aren't familiar, I'm Gaby Goldstein. I'm one of our co-founders here. And I think that, the summit is always a really great opportunity to reflect on both the work that we've done, the work ahead. And I think that the main theme, TLDR, if you zone out after this sentence, hear this. I think that we're really heading into a favorable year at the state legislative level. I'm really optimistic about our prospects, and I'm really excited to share with you why. So, we've been together at this for quite a while, and our mission is more urgent than ever, building power at the state level. And I don't know about you all, but I feel as energized and obsessed and motivated as ever for this work. Thinking back on the day this all started to now, I don't know that any of us foresaw that the work would be this urgent. But here we are, and we're doing it together. Many hands make this work light. So, as I was prepping for this morning, I was thinking about how yesterday was International Women's Day. And, in Biden's really excellent State of the Union speech and sort of the Republican Party's rather incomprehensible rebuttal. But I think it really showed us the stark divergence in the visions for the future that are being pursued by the parties, and how much of that is running through our states, and what an incredibly important role our states continue to play. And this issue, or this idea that national visions for the future increasingly play out in our states, is something that scholars like Jake Grumbach and Heather Gerken and Alex Hurdle-Fernandez have really explored. And I think the State of the Union speech was a great example of this, with Biden specifically calling out state laws, banning abortion, criminalizing doctors, and really carving back women's rights. And so the vision of women, their rights, their value as humans, as citizens, is just one of so many divergences in large-scale future building that we're seeing play out in our states. And of course, that's all against the backdrop of this revanchist Supreme Court supermajority that has really as a core mission the narrowing of federal protections and rights and powers, and the enlargement of state level power. So really critical that we continue to work on building state power. And, this summit's also a great opportunity, I think, to reflect on the positive power of states, from, raising the minimum wage, protecting abortion access, and pushing further into reproductive justice, right? Not just reproductive rights, but justice. The idea that states can set the conditions under which people can choose to parent or not parent, and if they do choose to parent, do so with dignity, which our blue states are really showing us. So, our work is urgent, it's nonlinear. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. On balance, we are winning. That is really one of the main points I want to make in this talk. And really, to underscore that, what I want to share with you is the tremendous progress that we have made in the past 7 years. I'm, as I said, really optimistic about this year. Okay, so we're going to do a quick overview of our strategy. Lala really laid it out. I don't have too much to add. And then really spend a deep dive looking at the electoral strategy. First, where we've been to set up the discussion about this year, and then this year. We'll talk about the map, we'll talk about the opportunities and the challenges. As we head into, I keep saying, if we had $1 collectively for every time we said that this was the most critical election year of our lives, we'd all be on a yacht somewhere. But unfortunately, it is true. So, briefly, as Lala shared, our mission, really the why. So many of us on the line have been working at this level now of the ballot for a while, so we know the why, right? State legislatures are a critically overlooked venue of power for the left. They are the sleeping giants of policy and really the linchpin for, for the future of the country. Certainly at the policy level, we see this with, political scientists call this policy diffusion, the idea that that states transfer policy around, and that state policy then gets adopted at the federal level, and so many policies start in our states, both on the revanchist side of the ledger in terms of our rights, but also on the positive side, right? On this world building that we're all engaged in, with a positive vision of how our country can function better when progressives control our states. Leadership pipeline. I mean, look, we just had Governor Hobbs on the line. She started in the Arizona State Legislature. Critical pipeline for leadership development. We are continuing to see that they are absolutely vital. Our legislatures are vital. They are the bulwark when it comes to fair elections, voting rights, abortion, democracy, all of these issues. Huge, as you all know, huge return on investment for volunteer time and energy. And we'll talk a little bit about that piece in just a second. We really are focused collectively on this call on state legislatures because we see that there is this trajectory of the narrowing of federal protections and rights and the expansion of state power. And we see this in all areas of social and civic life. And, as I've said, well, I won't say it. I'll point to our great friend Anat Shankar-Osario, who I know many of you love. We can't just be against things, right? There are these trends that tend toward an expansion of state power, but we have in our blue states a vision of what is possible. And I saw some friends on the line from Minnesota, new trifecta in Minnesota, new trifecta in Michigan, getting to work, repealing right to work, passing red flag laws. I'm here in California that's establishing a public funded abortion fund, right? So tremendous opportunity to expand the narrative and the imagination around what states can do for us. So that's why we focus on states. So how do we do it? These are the areas of our work. We win elections, we support organizers, we develop legislators, and we educate and empower. And I'm going to go through these quite quickly in the interest of getting to what we all want to talk about, which is the map for this year. But of course, we win elections. This is core to what we do at Sister District, always has been. This is how we do it. We use our data and analytics function to identify the most strategic and competitive state legislative races and chambers. We support candidates through our comprehensive candidate services program. We focus our volunteers on where they can have the highest impact on hard side, meaning in coordination with our campaigns, field and fundraising programs. And we focus on the pipeline through candidate development programs like our Future Winners program. We support organizers, of course, all of you, as well as through our State Bridges program, where we hold a series of fundraising events for state-based power building organizations that are engaged in year-round organizing work, often led by people of color, and really the folks at the center of state policy, right? Folks for whom state policy, really affects daily life. And we have our final State Bridges event coming up next week. I hope you all will attend. Perhaps someone can drop a link to the Mobilize. My fantastic co-founder, Lala, will be moderating a really important conversation there. We work with legislators to make sure that once they're elected, they have the resources and, importantly, community that they need to thrive. And we also work with others who run national organizations focused on state lawmaker support. We run a table where we get together with those organizations every couple of months to hear what they're up to and exchange ideas, work together where we can, so that we're really providing targeted support to our state lawmakers. And then we run our award-winning research program. We'll talk a little bit about that, as well as civic engagement programming to help the public better understand the importance of states and raise the visibility of our incredible leaders at this level of the ballot as well. Okay, so let's take a deeper dive into that first pillar, our political strategy. So in general, the strategy is always the same. We're always looking for 3 types of legislative chambers, right? There's 7,000 state leg seats across the country. How do we choose? The first cut is always to look at the chamber level. We're looking for 3 types of chambers. First is our blue flips. Those are chambers where Dems have the opportunity to compete for a legislative majority, right? Chambers that we think we can flip this year. The second are blue holds, where Democrats have a fragile Democratic majority, and we really need to lean in and make sure that we don't lose that chamber. And then the third are blue inroads, or no chamber left behind. These are chambers where we do not have a one-cycle solution. We are not likely to flip the chamber in this given year, but we have the opportunity to break Republican supermajorities or trifectas. We have the opportunity to position ourselves for future success, which is really important. Put a stake in the ground and make sure that we are investing in the long term in places that really have the opportunity for democratic growth. But in any given year, the mix of chambers and seats changes, right? The schedule of state legislative elections changes year to year. The composition of chambers shifts year to year. And really importantly, the set of broader electoral opportunities change each year. This is a really important piece of the equation. We're always looking for opportunities to force multiply our efforts, right? Where our efforts to drive awareness, resources, turnout towards state legislative races are nested in battlegrounds that will reverberate all the way up the ballot. So this year really focused on presidential battlegrounds, where all of our states are presidential battlegrounds, focused on states that also offer competitive Senate opportunities, gubernatorial opportunities. Not many gubernatorial races up this year, but there are a few, and will be there. And ballot initiatives, places that are holding ballot initiatives, for instance, on abortion. Governor Hobbs' own state of Arizona is likely to have an abortion protection ballot initiative this fall. We'll find out in the summer if they get enough signatures. But we're really looking for those broader opportunities. Really important. So let's take a step back for a second and think about where we've been. I get this question fairly often. We lost 1,000 state legislative seats during the Obama administration. How are we doing now? So let's take a step back and think about this. So when we started the organization in 2016, the Republican Party controlled the most state legislative seats that it ever had since the founding of the Republican Party. So let me just repeat that. In 2016, Republicans controlled the most seats that they had since the founding of their party. They controlled 67 of 98 partisan chambers, right? This was the lowest point of Democratic investment and interest in state legislatures, arguably in American history, right? I mean, as I said, the Republicans controlled more seats than since the founding of their party. So this wasn't an accident, right? We know that there's been generational investment in conservative infrastructure, in candidates, in institutions, in policy, and ideas, and we've really struggled on our side, really, in my view, overinvested in federal solutions, tactics, strategies, really to the mutual exclusion of state power building. It never needed to be zero sum, but it has been. And so as a result, we came into 2016 and the founding of this organization with really anemic institutions to support candidates and policy and all the rest. And so where are we now, right? We came in at this low point, very low point. I think the bottom line is we knew the work wouldn't happen overnight, and it hasn't, but we have made tremendous and very, very strategic gains that have really shifted the balance of power in the country at the state level. And so Net of the about 1,000 seats that we lost during the Obama administration, we've gained about 150 seats back net. Now, that doesn't tell the whole story, right? It depends on where those seats are, right? One seat makes a majority in a chamber. So I think the better way to look at it is that today, more people, for instance, more people live in Democratic controlled states than Republican controlled states, right? 42% of Americans live in blue trifectas, only 39% in red trifectas. And in 2016, as this stat here shows, the Republicans controlled 67 partisan chambers. Today it's 56. Right? So we have clawed back a tremendous number of chambers and really shifted power through strategic investments and progress. And I think we should really feel incredibly good about that the strategic piece of it, right? Just 150 seats net have gained us 11 chambers. And Sister District has been directly involved in many of those chamber flips. We've flipped 10 chambers since our founding in 2016, in Washington, Colorado, Maine, New Hampshire, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Virginia. So nice, we flipped the House twice. And as you can see, of 177 candidate endorsements, we've had 115 wins, and that's a 65% lifetime win rate. And that's right where we want to be, right? That means that shows that we're in strategic 50-50 districts that really could go either way. And it's our volunteers and our staff on the line of this call that are getting our candidates over the finish line. So really, really important to see those gains. And so looking at this year, going into this year, I think that, the TLDR is state legislative Democrats are heading into this year with momentum. I think that that's the bottom line that I hope you all come away with. 2022 was a very historic year at the state legislative level. It was a remarkable deviation from historical midterm trends, right? During midterms, historically, the president's party loses down ballot and, up ballot, right? That didn't happen in 2022 the way that it normally does. What happened? I mean, there was a huge galvanizing force around the Dobbs decision. And also good strategic investments and organizing. And through that, Democrats elected every incumbent senator. We expanded, we flipped a Senate seat as well. We won most of the competitive gubernatorial races, and we only lost the House by 6,600 votes. That may be less than, the number of folks in your neighborhood, right? We lost the House across the country by 6,600 votes, tiny, tiny, tiny margin. And at the state ledge level, it was a historic election as well. We, as you can see here, it was the first midterm election since 1934 that the president's party did not lose a single state legislative chamber. That is wild, right? And we had new trifectas blossom oddly in states that all start with an M. Michigan, Massachusetts, Maryland, Minnesota. We defended fragile majorities in places like Maine and New Mexico, gained a governing coalition in the Alaska Senate, flipped the Pennsylvania House, and achieved chamber-level supermajorities in Nevada and Vermont, Delaware, and prevented Republican supermajorities in Wisconsin, and at least initially in North Carolina. I don't know if you guys were following along, but unfortunately, a Democrat flipped her party affiliation in North Carolina and delivered a veto-proof supermajority, which we're going to break this year in the North Carolina House. So, 2023, I think, really built on that momentum. We saw Democrats running proudly on protecting and expanding abortion access, which continues to be a winning value for us, issue and value. We saw those beautiful wins in Virginia, reestablishing majority in the House and holding on to the Senate, as well as Andy Beshear's reelect in Kentucky, and in special elections we did well as well. So the big picture, I think, going into this year is that it is an optimistic political environment down ballot, right? There's a lot going on at the national level, and we can, and that certainly matters, and we can talk about how and why and all the rest. But we are going into this year at the state legislative level with the wind in our sails, right? Historic midterm performance, continued wins in 2023. I think Biden mentioned in his State of the Union address exactly that. We won in 2022 and in 2023, and we're going to keep winning. It is, I think, a better environment in certain respects than the last presidential, because sometimes people will say, well, isn't the right point of comparison 2020? Why are you talking about 2022, 2023? Shouldn't we be talking about the last presidential? And as you might recall, state leg Dems didn't do all that well in the 2020 election year. And in some respects, I think this is a better environment at the state leg level. Particularly in 2020, the pandemic was very disruptive for down ballot candidates who most need to be out on the doors. They need to be in community talking to their constituents and their voters. On our side, we were not able to campaign in 2020 in those traditional ways. On the Republican side, they were still out at the doors and doing all the things, but that really hampered us down ballot. And then I think Dobbs, continues to be was not obviously the decision came about after the 2020 election, and I think it continues. It's very clear it continues to be an incredibly galvanizing issue, not just for women, but across the board, not just Democrats, but independents and frankly, some Republicans as well. Abortion is across the board popular. Access to abortion is universally popular, and it really is getting folks out to vote. Redistricting, I think, created a heterogeneous landscape, right? Some states continue to be very badly gerrymandered, but others are much fairer than they were in prior cycles. And we'll talk about Wisconsin. I don't know if we've got any cheese heads on the line, but really and truly, there's new opportunities, and different states have different contexts, right? But overall, I think that the political environment for us down ballot is favorable. But of course, everything's going to depend on execution, right? We have done a tremendous amount of work in our research program looking at this phenomenon of down ballot roll off. What does that mean? It means when folks click the top of the ballot, right? Like they tick the box for president, but they don't vote all the way down to the state legislative candidates running in their district. And what we found, we went back and looked at all the battleground states going back to 2010. And what we found was a very, very alarming trend. And yes, both parties experience this phenomenon of roll off where voters, literally roll off their ballots from the top to the bottom. But state legislative Democrats experience it much more frequently and profoundly than Republican candidates. And so you can see this stat. We checked it 1,000 times. And it really is the case that in going back to 2010, down ballot Dems experience roll off 80% of the time versus 40% only for Republican candidates. So we have a tremendous challenge on our side to get our folks to vote all the way down the ballot. Now, this is a turnout problem. This isn't a persuasion problem. This isn't about persuading folks to go out and vote. These are people who are going out to vote already. They're in the ballot box. They're there. They just aren't ticking the box on our side, and they are ticking the box on the Republican side. So that's something that we really need to focus on. We're doing a tremendous amount of work on that right now in our research program to better understand why this happens on our side and what we can do about it. And so we've got a large-scale project underway. We're working with Data for Progress. We've run focus groups. We have run a large national survey. We'll be providing public results on that research quite soon. And then we're going to be moving into a message testing phase to better understand what messages will encourage and move our voters to tick all the boxes. Again, this isn't persuasion. This doesn't require getting one single person out to vote more than is already going out to vote. This is a different kind of persuasion, right? This is persuading people to vote all all the boxes on their ballot. And we can see how important this is because here are just a few stats on the tiny margins to success in 2022 that we had, right? So folks, I saw Missy Serrato's name being shouted out on the chat. Missy Serrato flipped the Pennsylvania House. One seat flipped the Pennsylvania House with 63 votes. Now think about that, 63 votes, 765 votes in one seat flipped the Michigan House, right? 404 votes in one seat won the Michigan Senate, right? So these are tiny, I mean, you can see 0.001% of the total votes that came in for Pennsylvania House candidates in 2022 flipped that chamber. And so now you can see the connection with roll-off, right? If we could just get, you know, 1,000 more people or 500 more people who are already out to vote to tick that box down ballot, we would win so many places. And one quick stat on that I love, I mean, I hate it, but I love it. I think it really drives the point home. In 2021, 60,000 more people voted for Terry McAuliffe, the Democratic gubernatorial candidate in Virginia. 60,000 more people voted for him than voted for down ballot Democrats. And we lost the House by 735 votes, approximately, right? So if we had just persuaded 750 people who already went out to vote for Terry, 750 people out of the 60,000 who voted for Terry and rolled off, we would have held the House. Tiny, tiny margins. And so chipping away at this down ballot roll-off problem is critically important if we want to continue building power. Okay, so everything depends on execution. Okay, let's talk about the target map. So this year, we have the tremendous opportunity to flip, I think, you know, a few more chambers, and these opportunities are really, really good. So I think right at the top is, you know, are the Arizona chambers, and I know many folks on this call have been working to flip the Arizona legislature for many, many years now, right? We have taken a number of runs at it. I think this year is the year, right? This is, you know, we're 2 seats away in both chambers. This is absolutely a presidential battleground, right? 10,000 votes in Arizona is all, you know, all that Biden won by. There's now, you know, an open Senate seat. Whoop, whoop. There it goes, toss up open Senate seat. As I mentioned before, there's likely, I think, to be a ballot initiative protecting abortion access in Arizona on the ballot this year, and which is very, very exciting. So in addition to the chambers in Arizona being an excellent set of flip opportunities, they are also nested in these critically important battlegrounds: presidential, Senate, abortion battlegrounds. Next is the Wisconsin Assembly. I got any cheeseheads on the line? Oh my gosh. You know, I have to say that I love all of my children equally in terms of all of these flip targets, but Wisconsin is, I'm extremely excited about Wisconsin. So for folks who haven't been following along too closely on Wisconsin, it has historically been an incredibly gerrymandered state. And the Republicans have controlled the legislature and run the board when it came to redistricting for decades. And that happened again after 2020. The General Assembly produced terribly gerrymandered maps. But in 2023, an incredible progressive coalition came together to elect liberal Judge Janet to the state Supreme Court by 11 points, which is a huge, huge margin that she won by, and it flipped the court to a liberal majority. And then they took up those maps and they threw them out as gerrymanders, as illegal gerrymanders. And so there was a process to redraw the maps, and certainly one can quibble with whether the maps were the absolute pinnacle of fairness, but they're good. They're good maps. And they certainly give us an opportunity to compete for the first time in decades in both chambers. Now, the Assembly is on the flip map, and the Senate is on the inroads map, simply because the Senate is only half of the seats are up in the Senate this year. And so we'll talk about that in a second, but the Assembly is certainly ripe to flip. And of course, this is also nested in a presidential battleground. Biden carried Wisconsin with 22,000 votes. Tiny, tiny margin, critical Senate hold with Tammy Baldwin up for reelect. So really, really important opportunities in Wisconsin. The Pennsylvania Senate is a harder flip, but it's on our map. We need 4 seats to flip that chamber. Some good opportunities, definitely excellent opportunities this year. Again, nested in a critical presidential battleground, right? Biden carried the state with 50.01% of the vote. I mean, it doesn't get much smaller than that. We have a critical Senate hold with Bob Casey, and so, really good opportunity there. We have on our watch list the New Hampshire Senate and House. We're very close to being able to flip both of those chambers blue, 2 seats, 3 seats, respectively. We'll see how things shake out there. It is a presidential battleground, right? Biden carried it, with about 52%. There is an open gubernatorial, which is important there. We're watching. We're watching what's happening in New Hampshire to see if we can be helpful in getting those chambers over the finish line. In terms of the hold, now these are the chambers where we have a fragile Democratic majority that we need to hold on to so that it does not slip back into Republican control. And at the very top of that list is the Michigan House. Now, the Michigan Senate is also a fragile Democratic majority, but they are not holding elections this year. So that's why the Michigan House is on our map and not the Senate. We have a 2-seat majority. It is, every day that this trifecta, this beautiful new trifecta has been in effect, has been a pleasure. To see what they have been able to accomplish in such a short amount of time has been nothing short of spectacular. And it's absolutely critical that we hold on to it so that so that Big Gretch, with her Big Gretch power, can continue to make these incredible policy gains. And again, extraordinarily tight presidential battleground, right? Michigan voted for Biden with 50.6% of the vote, tiny, tiny margins. We have an open Senate race. Debbie Stabenow is retiring. Very, very important in Michigan. The Pennsylvania House, like I said, Missy Serrato flipped it with 63 votes. There have been some special elections along the way, and we continue to have a 1-seat majority, very, very narrow majority, right? Again, nested opportunities, presidential, Senate, etc. But really, the Pennsylvania House is absolutely critical that we continue to hold on and continue to build power in the Pennsylvania House and hold on to that chamber. The Nevada Senate and Assembly, people often assume wrongly, in my view, that Nevada is a blue state. Nevada is not a blue state. Nevada is a purple state. It is very, very similar to Virginia in that sense, right? It is really we have majorities in the Senate and the Assembly, but it is a battleground. And I will say that the Republican governor in Nevada is quite popular, and has sort of again looking at sort of the Glenn Youngkin Virginia kind of comparison. He, unlike Glenn Youngkin, the governor in Nevada, took abortion off the table and was basically like, we're not we're not touching abortion. We're not going to do that. And as unlike Youngkin, who, you know, basically was gunning to dismantle abortion. And as a result, you know, Nevada is a very purple state. Those chambers need to be protected. It is absolutely a presidential battleground, right? 30,000 votes in 2020 for Joe Biden in Nevada, tiny, tiny margin there. We've got a critical Senate hold with Jackie Rosen. So it stays on our hold list. We've got the Minnesota House on our watch list. We have a fragile majority in the Minnesota House. Again, watching to see what happens. And, you know, presidential battleground, Biden carried it with 52% of the vote in 2020. Important Senate hold with Klobuchar. So we're watching Minnesota. And that takes us to our inroads states. So, you know, first is the Wisconsin Senate. Now, as I said, the new maps in Wisconsin give Democrats the opportunity to compete for majorities in both chambers. So on the map, the Wisconsin Senate is flippable. We are going to flip the Wisconsin Senate on these maps. The question is when. And because only half of the chamber is up this year, the other half will be up in 2 years. We may not be able to close the deal this year, given who in the chamber is up. What we can absolutely and will do this year is we will break the Republican supermajority in the Wisconsin Senate by 1 seat, right? We will break that supermajority. And we are going to set ourselves up for an easy flip in 26 if it doesn't happen this year. So extremely excited about the Wisconsin Senate. The Georgia House, you know, I think we continue to invest in the Georgia House. We see a tremendous amount of opportunity in the Georgia House. You know, the maps continue to be gerrymanders, and there's been litigation about it. And unfortunately, the maps are going to stand for this election. But there are good new opportunities on these new maps for us to continue to build power. And there is potentially no closer presidential battleground than Georgia, right? 12,000 votes in 2020. Really, really important for us to continue to make gains in Georgia and keep our stake in the ground and build towards the future. The last one is North Carolina. And what I want to say there is that we have the opportunity to break Republican supermajorities in both chambers. Now, what happened in 2022 in North Carolina was really unfortunate. We lost 2 seats in the Senate, and that brought us into a superminority. So Republicans had a supermajority in the Senate. But the problem is we also lost a couple of seats in the House. Initially, we held enough seats in the House to keep from superminority. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, there was a Democrat in the House, Tricia Cotham, if anybody's following along, who switched her party affiliation. She switched from being a Democrat to a Republican. She joined the Republicans, and she gave the Republicans a veto-proof supermajority. Now, what that means is that beforehand, for instance, in Wisconsin as well, both Wisconsin and North Carolina had a situation where the Republicans had a supermajority in the Senate, but not the lower chamber. What that meant is you need to have a supermajority of one party in both chambers in order to override the governor's veto, right? So if you don't have a supermajority in both chambers, the governor can reject legislation that comes to her desk. And we heard Governor Hobbs say that she vetoed, gosh, what was it, about 200 pieces of legislation. I remember reading that during her first year in office, Katie Hobbs vetoed more legislation than any governor in Arizona history. And she's able to do that because Republicans don't have supermajorities in those chambers. So what happened in North Carolina is we fell into superminority in both chambers. And even though we have a Democratic governor, like Katie Hobbs, we have a Democratic governor in North Carolina, he was not able to veto the bad legislation that the legislature would send to his desk because they had a supermajority in both chambers. And that's where we are right now. So the Republicans in North Carolina were able to pass terrible abortion restrictions, all kinds of bad policy. And the governor, the Democratic governor, cannot veto what comes to his desk in North Carolina. We're going to break those supermajorities in both chambers this year. That's what we're going to do in North Carolina. And of course, it's a presidential battleground. Trump carried it in 2020 with 49.9% of the vote. Right? That was enough to be the winning candidate in North Carolina, but tiny, tiny margins. Open seat for governor this year in North Carolina. And again, that's extremely important because we need to break these supermajorities and keep a Democrat in the governor's house, so that even if we don't have majorities in the legislature, which we're not going to have majorities, we'll have a Democratic governor who can veto bad bills. So the year ahead, we are in the process, like as with every year, we're in the process of figuring out exactly what seats we're going to be playing in. Our incredible political team, Sean Werner and Taylor Hoagland, are hard at work talking to candidates, talking to partners on the ground, figuring out where the best opportunities for us are. And of course, we launched our electoral strategy last month, and then as always, we'll be doing our Wave 1 endorsements in late April, Wave 2 in June, and all the rest. And I want to put, we're going to open up for, we have time for like just a couple questions. But before that, I saw a comment in the chat earlier, and I wanted to address it, which is, when you look at our map, it's not every single state where there are important ballot race, up ballot races, especially Senate races, right? So, places like Montana and so forth also have important races. Now, remember, so, why aren't those on our map? How does our map end up looking the way it looks? Remember, our first priority is the state legislature. We're looking for states that where there are chambers that we can flip this year, or hold on to fragile majorities, or make inroads into. And I want to say one specific thing about the inroad states. How do we choose those inroad states? Because certainly there are other states like Ohio or Montana that could also be, quote, inroad states. So when we decided to, we really decided to dig into that a couple of years ago, and we took a look going back 20 years at what sort of antecedents, what sorts of precursors we might be able to identify that would show us when a legislature was more likely to flip blue. And what we found 100% of the time in the past 20 years is that when a legislature flips blue, a state legislature, it is preceded 100% of the time by that state voting for the Democratic presidential candidate. 100% of the time. So that's why states like Georgia, Wisconsin, even North Carolina, which has voted blue at the presidential level in the past couple of cycles, that's why those states are on our inroads list. We are prioritizing states that have shown us, have given us an indication that we're in a strong position to be on the road to flipping those legislatures in the medium term. So just wanted to share that little piece of insight as well. So I think we have time for one question.
Gaby, we're actually at time, I'm sorry to say.
Oh, okay.
No, that's okay. But you were, that was amazing. And we're going to share all the slides later. So hopefully folks will still have lots of information afterwards.
Super. Well, in that case, please, apologies for not being able to answer questions, but hopefully that was helpful. So that concludes our strategy session. I will hand things off to Susan.